Gambit Chads, it is finally here. Welcome to the YanYan Gambit full repertoire video. We are going to go e4, and if our opponent plays the Sicilian, we play c3, and after d5, we are going to play knight a3, allowing them to take this pawn on e4, and after d3, we are going to have so much fun. Our plan is going to be bishop takes d3, queen e2. We're going to go bishop to f4. We're going to long castle, get him on the d file, play knight to b5, target the c7 square. I am so excited to cover all of these lines, including my recommendations for black, including all of the most common moves, and including some really awesome games. I don't know if I've ever had more requests to make a particular video than this one, and it's mostly owing to just my amazing fans and community, fellow Gambit Chads, YanYan, HighlyCruciferous, and others who've played all these games, who've even made these Lee chess studies that I'm going to link below. I had to do it all justice, and so I had to do a lot of research on this stuff. But this is really tricky stuff for black, and this is what I am going to be playing against every Sicilian I face at every level. Let's waste no more time diving right into it. What to do if you're black here. And we are going to cover everything, by the way, after d5. And I'll talk at the end of the video, I'll talk about moves other than d5, and actually why it's only 4th here among popularity, but maybe 2nd here among popularity when I switch to the Masters database. So that's kind of interesting. But I'm going to talk about all moves other than d5 at the end of the video here. And I'm also going to talk about all moves other than pawn takes e4 at the end of the video. But why are we playing this strange move knight to a3? I touched on it a moment ago. It's because we want a castle as soon as possible, and we want this knight to jump into b5 to look at that weak c7 square. So we're going to start with d takes e4, and we're going to cover other moves at the end of the video. But d3, and I'm also want to cover knight to f6, because knight to f6 seems to defend this extra pawn that black has, while also not giving us this nice little head start in development by takes. Okay, yeah, our next couple moves, and the order doesn't really matter, are going to be bishop to f4 and queen to e2. And the rook on d1 and the knight on b5 are going to create threats for the black king and queen to deal with before black has developed anything at all, and while they're still very far from castling. So, just to get you guys a little taste, I'm going to show you what happens if black plays literally the most common moves. Okay, so that is knight to f6 here in this position. We play bishop to f4. They play now knight to c6. That actually transposes, I put it this way, knight c6, queen e2, knight f6, bishop f4. So it doesn't really matter whether we play queen to e2 or bishop to f4, but now we're cooking with some serious threats. So we don't want to play knight to b5 immediately to attack c7, as long as black has the nice response available, knight d5, which is going to counterattack our bishop and defend c7. So that's why here we're playing queen to e2. And e6 and a6 are tied for the most common move in this position. e6 just to proceed with development, but a6... because our last move was bishop to f4 in this position, so a6 keeps away knight to b5, which is why a lot of people are doing it. But you spent an entire move there taking away knight to b5, but that was just one of our ideas. And after castles, we're already cooking with some nice discovered attacks here. You're going to note that a lot of lines, when black castles, they might not be able to because of takes h7 check, winning the queen. And here, for example, like the bishop can do a lot of things, such as even take a6 if the queen is hanging. So black here has bishop to d7 and queen to a5. I'm going to touch on both of them, but I told you guys that this is going to be a most common move train, a Lee chess challenge, if you will. So let's start out with queen to a5, and I had that eval bar on here, and you guys might have just noticed that eval bar jump all the way up in favor of white. The move here is knight to c4. a6, black plays very often. You'll note black is going to play this move very often to take away this very dangerous knight to b5, knight to c7, which combined with the rook can checkmate the black king. But what a6 also does is it gives us knight to b6 as well. So knight to c4, we're actually going to allow them to take on a2, and I'll turn this off just for a moment. And the nice finish we have here, we have a couple games with knight to d6 check right away, using the fact that we have this pin. Even better is to play bishop to b1 first. Our queen defends the knight against this queen, and now we're going to unleash the rook, and we're going to unleash the queen, and we have checkmate upcoming against this poor black king because of this knight to d6 check, and black's queen has gone fishing with the black king still in the middle. So, for example, it doesn't really matter here where the queen goes. Let's say queen to a1. What we're going to do is we're going to play knight to d6 check, blocking the rook just for a moment. But yes, great pin on the pawn here, and black's kind of toasted here. Doesn't matter whether they go to d7 or d8. What we're going to do is we're going to take this. It's check. You can't really block with either of these knights. Both are hanging. This is the only spot. We can go back check. No, we don't want to draw. What we're going to do now for the checkmate is we're going to take this bishop, and king takes c8, really the only move. And now after queen to e6 check, yeah, we're using these diagonals. We've got a lot of things cooking in our favor, and this is checkmate. So just a nice little treat and an introduction to the YanYan Gambit right away. If black plays pretty much the most common moves, they're going to be in serious trouble. So that's owing to queen a5. There was knight to c4, and the idea of hopping in right away with knight d6 check. A better option for black is bishop to d7 here to cover this up against their queen. And nonetheless, we're still going to play knight to c4. And believe it or not, there's 15 games in this position, and in only 6 of them did black not get checkmated right away. So knight to d6 is checkmate right away. b5, shout out to Mora Horror for having a game in this position. Knight to d6 is checkmate right away. This is pretty funny, actually. There's one game here where instead of e6, which I'm going to touch on in a moment, black played queen to c8. So I stand corrected. Black did not get checkmated right away in this game, but it's it's kind of funny that you would see this threat and be like, oh, guess I better lose my queen and allow knight to d6 check. But that's not checkmate. Okay. Better move to stop knight to d6 checkmate is to play e6 to unleash this bishop. And you'll note with knight to d6 check, it's good. It's good to get this trade very often, but it's not elite. Because here, we're still down a pawn, and black has knight to e7 to cut our control of the f8 square and to prepare castling next move, and they'll survive, at least, right? So if they have knight to e7 against bishop takes d6, they're probably okay, because the bishop is also going to be blocking this file, which is our other big resource. What we can do that's even better, right? So if they've already played bishop to e7, then that's nice to make them waste that tempo, right? To have to move that bishop twice. But the bishop's still on f8 right now, so they're not threatening to castle right away. And we really do want to keep them in the center. What we want to go after is this knight. So a really great move in this position is this move bishop to e4. And with bishop to e4, now if our opponent plays bishop to e7, what we do is we can take c6, pawn takes is forced, owing to that pin against the bishop, and now knight to d6 check. I mean, you guys can have the eval bar if you'd like it. Now knight to d6 check, they can, and if takes, I mean, king to f8 is a better move, but if takes, now they're in a serious trouble, because we've gotten the same position, except we've traded the bishop for the knight. Also, this is pretty uncomfortable for black, and this bishop is now just a super dominant piece, uncontested, blocking castling here, going to scoop up a pawn at minimum, and maybe like our queen will wander in and make some really brutal threats as we start to finish up our development. So bishop to e4, really strong move. Maybe another option for black is at least maybe to take that bishop. However, after queen takes e4, what we've done now is let that loose, trading the bishop for this knight. This knight was also important. Why is that? Because now, if they castle, they have this pin to deal with, and now they're going to lose this bishop clean. They're going to lose this bishop clean. There's nothing they can do to save it because they've traded that knight, which would have defended here, and we've gotten this bishop out of the way that now wins the bishop. So here, just an absolute lost position for black in both circumstances. So bishop to e4 is a really nice move in this position. So yeah, black's actually kind of lost. And all they did wrong was just play this move a6, which looks just so innocent, just stopping knight b5. Oh yeah, that could be scary. Let me stop that, and now let me finish this up. But unfortunately for them, threat here of getting your queen. Okay, now you defend that. Now threat of getting your king, defend that. But now with bishop to e4, I'm taking this knight. I'm knight d6. So all of this stuff, or I'm going to win your bishop in some lines. So all of this stuff just keeps coming at them, and this is exactly how we love to play. So a6, as I noted, wasn't necessary. Because knight to b5, if they can respond with knight to d5, it's a great response. Because it attacks our bishop, and like I said, if the bishop retreats, then a6, they could drive the knight back, right? So knight to b5 actually wasn't really quite on the table, so long as this knight is here and has access to knight d5. So a better option for black, well, let me tell you what a better option for black isn't. A better option for black isn't the third most common move. So the second most common, or tied for the first, was a6. Third most common move, bishop to g4. Not a great option either, right? Looks like, okay, maybe we'll finish development this way, and maybe we'll give rook c8 against the dangerous knight to b5. Not a good idea. Because here after f3, if the bishop now retreats to h5, it's in a really bad spot. Here's why. After we castle, our threat, so now, okay, you play e6, maybe you'll finish development, but our threat is now going to be g4, and this is going to look really brutal for black, because the only spot is bishop to g6, and now after take, we won that bishop clean. Queen's got to move, and owing to our excellent discovery, yeah, we're just up a clean piece in this position. So bishop on h5 is in a really bad spot. Otherwise, like, queen moves somewhere, and then here I think, like, we might just have, like, knight to b5. Yeah, so okay, something like g4, take, cover the d5 square, and now knight c7 is looking pretty imminent here. Yeah, that looks kind of correct. Or even better, just knight to b5 right now. When you have knight c7 and knight to d6 with this pin, knight to d5 is not going to help you so much. Knight to d6 check with the fork here. So, yeah, pretty good stuff for white. Pretty good stuff. Bishop to g4, not a great option. Bishop to d7 back, as HighlyCruciferous once got in the game, also not a great option because knight to b5, yeah, has two excellent threats in this position owing to this pin. So bishop to g4, not a great option. Okay, a little better for black is to play e6. Actually, more than a little. Much better for black is to play e6, right? So now, okay, they're not getting mated with knight to d6, and maybe they'll get their king out of the center. We're going to play rook to d1. And so this is the first time we're talking about lines that actually don't outright lose for black, and so we've got to talk about the general strategy for this line if we're not winning right out of the opening. So rook to d1 versus long castles. Here's the thing. If we long castle, and it's okay, if we long castle, but this is an important subtlety, right? Black can play your bishop to d6. They can play your bishop to d6, and there's two things that we don't quite have in this position. We don't quite have takes, and a killer discovery for this bishop. We don't have bishop to b5 check, because the knight's there, and we don't have bishop takes h7 check, because they're not castled yet to win the queen. So black's actually okay here, and any other bishop move, maybe they have queen to f4 check, so like, you can't do something ridiculous, because you might lose your bishop here, because that's a counter check. So bishop to d6, and that's a nice trade for black, right? Because this bishop was causing them a lot of problems, and they're very happy to make that trade if they can. And we also don't have just a bishop move, because as I said, this is check, right? Otherwise, like bishop c2, if the king were on b1 here, they might be losing that bishop owing to this pin, but bishop takes f4 is check. So that actually works out the opposite way. We're losing a bishop rather than winning one, owing to the position of our king. So bishop to d6 to take away that resource, because they have it with the knight on c6 blocking this check after, say, a potential trade, we're just going to play your rook to d1. We're just going to play the very simple rook to d1, and it's going to cause a little bit of annoyance for black still, because they can't just castle and allow bishop takes h7, but they don't have bishop to d6, because here now any bishop move is going to win that, right? Our king is not in a checkable spot. This just loses the queen. This isn't check. So, and like say knight to d5, we can go takes, and c4, for example, and we'll get them with a different pin. Somehow that wasn't best. You know what we have? I just realized it. I have the engine on, but I don't have any moves recommended. Knight to d5, so we have... Okay, well, for one, we have rook takes d5. I was going to say something more ridiculous, which was takes, knight to b5 here, and now takes. So pawn takes because we have the pin, and queen takes because we have knight to c7 check, winning the queen. Okay, unnecessary. We're going to play rook to d1. We're going to play rook to d1 so that there's no bishop to d6. So black is best off probably just playing the simple bishop to d7 here. Knight to d5 is also playable. It's not going to make too big of a difference. It's actually really going to transpose to pretty similar stuff that I want to talk about shortly. So let's say bishop to d7, and we're just going to play knight to f3. Black is going to develop. We're going to castle, and we're going to play knight to c4. And black here can play like knight to d5 and bishop to g3. So you might get a position that looks kind of like this. We're down a pawn, and black survived. Their king made it out of the center. They're not losing a piece or anything imminent like that. But you'll note the eval bar is still working in our favor. It is actually plus 0.5 in this position as I have the engine open next to me. It's because black has no great ideas in this position. It's hard to recommend what to do going forward for black. Their bishops don't have great diagonals, their rooks don't have open files, and the opposite is true for us. After a simple rook to e1, we're cooking this way, we're cooking this way. We've got both rooks on some nice open files, and all of our pieces in general are doing great jobs. What's a logical path forward? Something that might be pretty dangerous is a move like bishop to b1, queen to c2, and looking at h7. If g6, you can hit him with like h4, h5. We can just play rook to e1 and drop a knight on a really nice outpost on the e5 square. So these positions can arise via like a number of different ways. But in general, they're good. They're very good. Because if it's plus 0.5, the engine is showing for the side down a pawn, practically it's probably even better than that. So I'm very happy to play these sorts of positions. If black doesn't lose immediately, another move here they have is knight to d5. That's also okay. We just play bishop to g3. They could play something like bishop to e7. Like I said, just knight f3, castles. And here they need to play something like bishop to d7. Else we might play like c4, making the knight move and now having takes h7 check to win the queen. So they need to watch out for that. But if black doesn't lose immediately, like we're still very happy. All we're going to do is bring our pieces to better squares like here, and you know, just play chess from here. This is a great position to get from a gambit in general. And as we can see, we actually have some nice wins by one of our gambit chads and viewers, Spreek, in this exact position. Another option black has here is queen to a5. That is the third most common move in this position, rather than the more safe bishop to d7. Queen to a5 is another option. However, it's gonna be it's gonna be a little dangerous for them because of the very common queen a5 response, which is just knight c4. So they can play queen a5, but it doesn't make a lot of sense without our king this way, and so they can go fishing for this pawn. But after something like knight to f3, this is going to be a tough situation for them. Bishop to e7, we can play something like knight to d6 check. Takes, bishop takes, we're going to cut them from castling. Knight to e7 is not very helpful because there's no castling threat when the knight is just hanging. You need your queen back home to help in a situation like this. So something we can do here is continue to like pile on to this king as we keep it caught in the middle of the board. And the queen on a2 is looking really, really out of position in a situation like this one. So yeah, queen a5, not a great option for black to get out of the way because of knight c4, and we're going to castle, and our opponent is probably not without the queen's help defending the d6 and e7 squares in the middle. So that about covers most of black's options here. Black can play, so we're talking about knight f6, bishop to f4. We were talking about all options, knight c6, which is the most common move. Black has a couple other setups, including with e6 and a6. So e6 is going to look very similar to some of the others here with queen to e2, bishop to e7. And now in this situation, black's already committed bishop to e7, so we're totally fine long castling because they're not going to want to play bishop to d6 in one go. That's the only reason why we wouldn't really long castle to get our rook into this situation. But long castle, short castle, both are in general fine. And yeah, we're going to have probably a very similar situation to the others, except with our king on this side of the board. And we can start looking at a lot of the same ideas in this position. So again, another plus 0.5 position for us out of the opening. And a good idea here, they could have thrown in this or not. A good idea here is to play h4, to play h5, to play g4, to play g5, to play h6, just to come at them. We're on opposite side castles. We control the center. We have better pieces. Let's just come at their king. Sorry, it is really hot. Let's just come at their king with our pawns, and we're going to try to attack. All right, so we're going to play something like bishop to e1. We can play the queen c2, attacking h7, and we can play something like g4, g5, h5, and cause a lot of issues. And if this knight moved, or we can make it move, right, with our queen on c2, attacking h7, we can make it move with some resources like bishop to e5. We might force something like g6 to stop a queen and bishop from checkmating on h7. And if we force something like g6, then h5 really starts to make a lot of pawn trades and potentially opens a file for checkmating them in the future. So this is exactly how we want to play. This is just a dream gambit scenario out of the opening. Black should maybe try something a little more ambitious than that. And a really interesting setup that they could do, which is kind of like a pro gamer setup a little bit, is to play your a6, taking away knight b5 and bishop to b5, right? But as we established before, might not be the most useful move. And after queen to e2, to play this with e6, castles, and to play this with knight b to d7. So a6 to take away knight b5. So knight d5 is not a resource that they'll have all the time if you know, they're allowing us our rook free reign to maybe control d5. And to play knight to d7, which is otherwise going to patch up b6. And this is not a common setup at all for black. You'll note there's just 4 games in this position. But it's a pretty interesting one, and I felt I should cover it. Because now if we kind of just wander in with this move like knight to c4, and after something like b5, just knight to d6 check, takes, this looks really good cutting black's castle here, and there's no e7, but black is actually set up pretty well to maybe castle along this way. So kind of an inhuman sort of response there, but they can hold equality that way. The best option after knight c4, b5 is to play this move with bishop to e4. And that way, this is kind of a tougher situation for black. Now, if they take, queen takes, we're attacking this rook here. And now with knight to d6 check, we've taken away their option for long castle. And here, somehow there's equality, but I don't know why anyone would ever play this with the black pieces, because this pawn is falling due to this pin on the knight. And there, you can't castle in either direction if you're black in this situation. So this seems a very inhuman sort of way to play. But yeah, in general, we've talked about this a couple times. Bishop to e4 is a nice resource to open up your rook. And yeah, knight to d6 check, bishop takes d6. It can be very, very strong, but also stronger if we prepare it. Otherwise, yeah, I mean, if you don't have to go knight to, like if they play bishop to e7 and they're about to castle, now is a great time to play knight to d6 check because they've already moved that bishop once. Otherwise, you can kind of prepare for it, right? Like, let's say if it was our move again, I would like here, I would play knight to f3, force them to make me play knight to d6 check by having a threat to castle, and then I get in this move knight to f3 for free because you've now moved your bishop twice. I want you to move your bishop twice, right? So that's kind of what we're looking at with knight to d6 check. So a6, e6, kind of an interesting idea there that black has. And I think that is pretty much going to cover all the options here. Yeah, so bishop to d6 is not going to be an option in, or at least a great option in this situation, and here's why. It's because we have bishop to b5 check, and now after some block, we have rook to d1. So not castles, but rook to d1, and so they tried playing bishop to d6 in one go. It did not work. Here they're going to lose their bishop. Because bishop takes f4 is not check, right? So bishop to d6 we're going to take off the table. Most likely, you're going to knock them out with some knight b5, knight c4, and drop in there, or some discovery with the bishop. And if not, they'll survive castling, something like this, but you're still going to have a great setup, whether you castle short or you castle long. And from there, it's all about just coordinating your pieces and launching a nice attack and putting black on the back foot. As hopefully I'll continue to advertise in my games as I stream this line. But that just about covers all of black's options for pawn takes d3. We're going to play bishop takes d3. They're going to play knight to f6. We're going to bring our bishop to f4 and our queen to e2. We're going to bring our bishop to f4 and our queen to e2. We're going to look at knight to b5, knight to d6, and knight to c7. We're going to castle and look at some killer ideas there. We're not going to allow bishop to d6 in one go. And we're going to make things very, very, very hard for black in a lot of these lines. Worst comes to worst, they survive with their king out of the center, but it's still not a great position. A bit better option for black is maybe to play knight to f6. To play knight to f6 is much less common. You'll know e takes d3 is going to cover 3/4 of the games, but knight to f6 is going to defend this pawn, not give us e takes d3, bishop takes d3, a little head start in development there, and also develop a piece for black, right? So knight to f6 is an interesting idea. No matter, we're just going to play bishop to f4 and play around this. And with bishop to f4, what we want to do in a lot of cases is just take on e4. We want that queen trade. We're going to play rook takes d1, and then we want to play knight b5 and knight to c7 anyway. So a lot of the ideas you'll note are still going to be quite similar. Let's have a look. So knight c6, most common option, and it just leads to equality at best for black. Because what we play here is the simple pawn takes e4, now proposing the queen trade. Let's say they capture on d1, rook takes d1. And here, black needs to know the very good move e5. For example, if they play the second most common move, knight takes e4, this is a big blunder. They've played knight c6, they've played knight e4, and now there's nobody that can stop this knight just from waltzing right into c7. They need at least knight to a6 to stop that. And in this position, knight c7 is not only going to win the rook, but it might win the king as well, because that is a checkmate threat. So, tough situation here for black. They need to find the very good move e5. And actually, before I cover e5, let me cover this move a6, which looks to make a lot of sense, just covering knight b5. And they might think, okay, finally we'll play f3 and we'll just get a normal equal endgame. However, I told you guys about a6 to restrict this knight. Very often what it gives us is the b6 square. So let's look at that. Let's play knight c4, and we'll give this pawn another time. Still, they can't take it, pretty obviously, because knight to b6 is now going to fork here. Rook to a7 is the only spot with that under control, and now that might just win the bishop totally clean. Not might, it does. So that's not an option for them. A bit of a better option is bishop to e6, and here we're following a highly cruciferous game. Knight to b6, attacking the rook. Rook to d8, that's the only square. And now here's a pretty remarkable move that highly cruciferous has played in this position. It is the move rook to a1. Rook to a1. And it's quite incredible because black's rook is actually completely trapped. Black's rook is completely trapped. Bishop to c7 is coming next, and there's no way to create any square for this rook. These squares are all taken away. So are these by the knight, and then the other ones by the bishop. So bishop to c7 is coming, and it's just going to trap this rook in like a position like this, for example. So that's a pretty fun line that has actually occurred in a game before, which I really like. So yeah, so bishop to e6 was an option here. So okay, that covered a6. The best move is e5, which allows knight b5, and still no clear way to stop knight c7. And you don't want to take on f4. Because knight to c7 check, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be blocking this d-file. And if the king can't go to the d-file, then the knight's probably getting out. Because if king e7 is forced, then the king cannot, or no one really can stop the knight from getting back out. In which case, white just won a rook for their bishop here. So the best move for black, the absolute best move, is this move bishop to d7 to create the square for the king. But this is kind of an inhuman move to find. Bishop to d7, we should just play something like bishop to g5, and the position is completely equal. The most common move here I'll cover, it's rook to b8 in this position, just to kind of not lose a rook. However, black's still much worse here after check, king t7. Remember, it's great that we have this rook here, right? The queen trade is actually really cool to have if you have rook takes d1, right? Because the rook jumps into the game and just does a great job. Because now we play knight c7, bishop to g5, and the 3 pieces we have out are actually really bothering the king. We want to play something like knight to d5, check using the pin, putting a lot of pressure on this knight. And it's kind of a really annoying situation for black. They play king e7, blocking the bishop here, and none of their pawns are defending this important square. Everything seems a little awkward for them, and this position is plus 1.6. And that has actually occurred 4 times. Shout out to Mora Horror and Cruciferous for having this exact position 4 times on the board. So, interesting stuff there. Let me see here. Okay, yes, I talked about queen takes d1. I did not talk quite about e5, which isn't as common, but e5 is an option to not give us rook takes d1, but they're still going to have to reckon with the fact that they can't recapture with the rook, so they have to do some awkward recapture. Knight takes is not really possible because they're just going to kind of lose that pawn, so king takes is best, but after bishop to g5, we pin the knight that would otherwise be attacking here. We're going to castle with the check, and our knight's going to jump into the game, and honestly, I'd probably rather be white in this position, but this is the best black can do, try to get equality into the endgame in a situation like this, and not get totally screwed by this knight hopping into c7, the dangerous YanYan knight. So, d takes e4 after knight to c6, which is a solid option for black. Let's talk about a6, which similarly, like, the ideas are pretty straightforward in the YanYan, right? I kind of like this because there's not so much to remember. We're kind of just going to play bishop f4, queen e2, castle, get him with the rook, get him with the knight. And so in this line, if knight to f6, we're going to play bishop to f4, and really what we want to do is play pawn takes e4 next move. We want to play pawn takes e4 next move. We want to make that queen trade happen and then hop around with this knight. So for example, how are we going to hop around with this knight if we don't have access to b5? You guessed it. We're going to hop to b6. We're going to hop to b6. So knight to b6 and is a very serious fork threat. Knight to c6 does nothing to stop that if you don't have access to the b8 square, as we already touched on. Black here must play knight to d7. But here, after g3, we still have remarkable compensation for the pawn. And here, Spreek actually just defeated an IM very quickly. We can even have a look at this game. Spreek here just defeated an IM very quickly. The IM played like a lot of great moves. But after b5, bishop to g2, the IM immediately blunders with move that accounts for 2/3 of the game with bishop to b7, and it's pretty funny how this blunders, because you think this makes a lot of sense to contest this bishop and to hold the knight and to maybe not lose the rook here, but suddenly knight to a5 kicks the bishop from the diagonal. That's the only square left, and black is just losing a piece outright here. There's nowhere left, and all we need to do is just take and take. So, nice stuff here. Yeah, instead of bishop to b7, they needed to play takes c4, takes e4. But this is kind of a situation where I really like white. Rook to a7 seems very awkward. And I kind of like this compensation that we have for the pawn in this line. And even so, I'm not even sure that has yet to be found. So, yeah, g3 and bishop to g2 is a pretty tough situation for black. And at minimum, yeah, let's play knight a5 and let's take that pawn. So, fun stuff there. Yeah, we're just going to take e4. We're really just going to take e4. Let's talk now about... Let's talk about the third... So, the fourth most common move is just e takes d3, which is just going to transpose into this position that we already saw. Let's talk about bishop to g4. If you guys have been following my YouTube channel, one of my more recent videos is my very first YanYan Gambit that I played. And in my first YanYan Gambit that I played, this is the position that I got. This is the position that I got with knight to f6 and bishop to g4. So this is interesting. This is a little bit new. Obviously, we're not going to be playing d takes e4 and trading queens. Our own queen is under attack. In YanYan's original study, which I'm also going to talk about at the end of the video, but the legendary study that exists, he recommends here queen to c2, which is attacking e4, and so kind of induces pawn takes d3, bishop takes d3, and we're going to drive this bishop away from stopping our castle and castle along ourselves, and continue to play with this compensation, which makes a lot of sense. However, there's also the improvised move that I played over the board that HighlyCruciferous also endorses and says should be the main line. It is this move queen to b3. So with queen to b3, we're immediately counterattacking b7, and this is probably maybe one of the very few sharp lines that you actually have to know. But even here, there's not too much to know, because right now we're attacking b7 right away. And, okay, kind of a fun situation here. Black here could play pawn takes d3, as happened in my game. After queen takes b7, though, this is already very bad for them, because we're attacking the rook. They're close to checkmating us. d2 would be checkmate, right? Because they actually control the other spots for our king, but our bishop is eyeing that. We're attacking the rook. Black here could play this move queen to d5. As happened in my game, I believe I played queen to b5 check here. The better option after queen to d5 is to actually just trade it and play bishop takes d3. Because they actually can't take the bishop. This is what I missed in the game. They cannot take the bishop here because of bishop e4, which is going to trap the rook. So here, yeah, they took a bishop, but they're actually going to lose a rook in this situation. Knight to c6 doesn't help because this is check, so they're still losing that rook. So in this situation, White has regained their pawn and just has much, much better development and is still threatening bishop e4. Knight to d7 is even worse for Black here. I'll note knight to d7 is even worse for Black because now after knight to b5, we're really hopping into c7 and causing lots of problems. The best option for Black after queen b3, and the reason why you see the eval bar not be that high is because of this move nobody has found, is this move e5, which is, yeah, it's quite difficult. It's quite difficult to find. The point is that after takes, now d2 is going to be checkmate, right? Now d2 is going to be checkmate. They've distracted the bishop over here. So e5, pretty sharp stuff. I believe you can still play queen takes b7, and then after takes, they can give up their rook. So just wild lines, but you're probably not going to face this over the board. But otherwise, yeah, queen b3, nice move here to counterattack b7. And otherwise, yeah, if they defend like b7 in any way, you can hop in with it, knight b5, looking at knight c7. You can force knight a6. You can play takes, and they can't take back because of f3 with the fork. f3 anyway is going to introduce rook d1 ideas. Even in this position, actually, now that I realize it, I think we might have knight to d6 check, and nope, I'm sorry. I was going to say knight to d6 and bishop to b5. But yeah, we're going to takes, we're going to play f3, and we're going to swing our rook to d1 in a situation like this. So, that just about covers knight to f6, right? Knight to f6, we're going to play bishop to f4, and in general, we're going to try to trade the queens, hop around with this knight. If we can hop to b5, that's great. If they play a6 and take that away, that's also fine. We're going to play knight to c4 and try to get in knight to b6. The real interesting stuff in the YanYan comes in the declined variations. It comes in the declined variations, believe it or not. E4, C5, C3. Typically, the declined variations are the ways to avoid kind of the trickiest stuff and the most dangerous stuff if you're playing against the Gambit. However, not in this case. Not in this case. We have some very interesting stuff prepared here for Black. D takes e4, I'll note, still accounts for 70% of games. But d4 is the second most common move, and it's a pretty bad one, right? I mean, d4, like, it makes some sense. Okay, we're going to, like, push forward. We're going to make a claim in the center, but it's not great, and Black really has very little development. For example, I have here just the most common moves for both sides. We're just going to play knight f3, knight to c6, bishop to b5, threatening to double up these pawns. Black here plays bishop to d7 to contest that. Castles, a6 to drive us away, take, trade, d3. Now we've developed perfectly cleanly. We've castled. We have that controlled. We trade off our light square bishop, which would be bad otherwise with these light square pawns, but our dark square bishop is the one that's left, is very happy about that. E6, knight to c4. These are literally all the most common moves for both sides. The knights have jumped into the game very well. It's a plus 1.2 position because another one of White's threats, in addition to attacking this pawn, is to play knight e5, take here, force pawn takes, and have a very weak pawn that they can attack. Knight fe5 also very possible as well. That's going to be a great outpost in that case if you could make that trade. Queen to a4, rook comes to c1. Great targets. Just a really nice position for White, and I can't imagine anyone wanting to play this for Black. I mean, in terms of all moves other than d takes e4, and at the end of the video, I'm also going to get into my recommendation for Black, but like getting this position and playing anything else is kind of like pathetic, if I may say, because I mean, come on. Like, knight to a3 happened, and you're not going to take this pawn in the middle of the board. It's kind of crazy, and I don't know. You got to go for it. You got to go for it. I mean, you can't be playing chess scared of your opponent. If your opponent plays anything else, I think that really kind of indicates kind of how scared they are, and that's just no way to play chess. Okay, let's talk about a couple other moves. I'm going to talk here about the third, fourth, fifth most common moves, e6, knight c6, and a6, which HighlyCruciferous also covered in his study. Let's talk about knight to c6. Let's go in order here. Knight to c6, and it gives us the option to transpose back into kind of normal alapins, right, where pawn takes d5, queen takes d5. Like, imagine we played that on the second move of the game and then played knight a3, knight c6. It gives us this option, which is just going to be kind of some equal positions here, and d4. Maybe the knight can jump into the game a little bit. We have a very interesting option that we can do instead, which is this nice move d4, which is a little bit tricky, right? Because it gives black a couple options to mess up. It gives c takes d4 and d takes e4 as options here, right? If they play here, now this pawn is just going to push right in between, attack this knight, and this knight's not going to have so many great options. Because once the knight now jumps into the middle of the board, right, as knights do, they like to jump to the square the pawn was just controlling, right? So the knight now jumps into the middle of the board. A great option we have here is check, bishop to g7, and takes. All right, so the queen does this nice zigzag pattern, another thing c3 gives us. And here, this is just great for white. We're not down a pawn anymore. And h4 is another nice move, threatening h5 and really trapping that knight. So tough situation here for black, as they're also very, very far from castling this king. So d takes e4, not a great option. C takes d4, a little bit better. But we're not just going to go c takes d4 and accept such a weak pawn in the middle of the board. What we're going to do instead is play pawn takes d5, and after queen takes d5 to use our YanYan knight and jump in knight to b5. So we took on d5, we played knight to b5, and we've dragged the queen out of her home so that we're now threatening knight to c7. The top engine move here is invites another crazy gambit. It's this move queen to e5 check. I'll touch on it in a moment. The more common move is queen to d8 to just run back home. And all we're going to do against queen d8 is play knight to f3 here. And at minimum, we're going to just grab our pawn back. Because d takes c3 is not a good choice in this position. Black continuing to get greedy here. D takes c3, not a great choice because of the very fun move we have here, bishop to f4. Bishop to f4, on queen trades, we know this fun idea of preparing rook takes d1, and now knight to c7 is not just threatening the rook, but also threatening to win the king, as this is now going to be checkmate with our rook controlling all that. So the taking a couple pawns is really the least of the concerns in this position. So bishop to f4 is a great move in that position. D takes c3 is kind of losing as a result. A6 is probably the best move black could try because it's very simple equality. Now asking us to just go knight b takes d4 before we're able to play bishop f4. No, I'll note we don't want to play bishop f4 here because there's just e5, right? So that's why we play knight to f3 first to control here. But e5 stops our control of c7. So in this position after queen to d8, we can play knight f3, a6, and we're just going to come back knight takes d4. Knight takes, and now we can take on d4 either way. Probably better to take with the queen. We can't really keep queens on the board much longer because e5 is coming anyway. So queen takes d4, we can play takes, and we'll just probably reach an equal endgame like this, which is black's best play. So that's if they play here queen to d8 and then drive us out with a6. They have the other interesting option here, e5, which leads to kind of some crazy stuff. So it kind of defends d4 a little bit and also kind of stops bishop f4 a little bit. We can play your queen to e2, which leads to some more crazy lines, threatening knight takes e5, threatening c takes d4 with the pin. And this is getting to be like a little bit of a tangent here to cover more, but I'll just leave it here. And you know, if I get this position in the game, having no further analysis, I'll be very happy about that because I'm down one pawn here, but I'm probably getting at least one back, and their king's in the middle, and this position seems kind of fun. Maybe my next move is bishop to f4 and castles as I continue to attack these pawns and their king in the middle of the board. So fun stuff there. Although that position certainly deserves further analysis. Let's talk here about, yes, so we were talking about, so just for a refresher, knight to c6 on this move, d4, c takes d4, e takes, queen takes, knight to b5. So we're hopping here and trying to cover c7, queen to e5 check is the top move of the engine. It is check and cover c7, to be fair. We can just play bishop to e2 to cover that up. d takes c3, knight to f3, attacking the queen. Black needs to be careful here. It looks maybe pretty tempting to go takes b2 and takes a1, winning a rook by getting a new queen. But this queen was more important than this queen, because what the new queen doesn't do is cover c7, because that's just checkmate. So that's pretty nice, and that's actually happened in 6 games. That knight to c7 checkmate. So that's pretty fun. But anyway, take c3 and f3. Black's best option is to go queen to b8 to run all the way back home. And after just a move like castles, allowing for c takes b2, bishop takes b2. Okay, they shouldn't take that pawn. Wow. After a move like castles, wow, what a fun position. I mean, if this isn't every Gambit Chad's dream, to have just our king safe, having a lot of development, and our opponent having just absolutely no development in exchange for one measly pawn. Give me this position every day of the week and twice on Sunday, please. So, c takes d4, d takes e4, all covered here. e6 is a bit of a safer option for black. It just kind of covers these pawns a little bit. And bishop to f4, they can continue to play this pretty safe, actually continue to stop knight b5, which would otherwise be very dangerous, right? They don't have knight d5 here, and they don't even have knight a6 to cover against knight c7, so always got to watch out for that. Here, like this, they can just lose like that. But they can here play a6 to continue to play things pretty safe, and in a situation like this, you might want to just play takes and bring this knight back into the game, having no options this way. Knight to c2 to cover d4 at least, and to just develop your pieces a little bit. So black does have options to play this like really, really safe if they want to. It's not quite common. Black here could also play this other move. Let's look at e6 in this position. And I really like what Cruciferous had prepared against e6, because there's like a couple. I mean, e6 is a move a lot of French players might play. So for example, e5 and c6, d4. This is starting to look very, very much like a French structure with e4, e6, d4, d5, e5, right? Just a common stuff if those were the first few moves of the game. A nice option here we have is to play d3, because with d3 we actually invite d takes e4 as the most common move, but oh, look at that, we have transposed back into our beautiful YanYan Gambit with e6 played, which is not even a great move. And now we want to play knight b5, we want to play d takes e4, and we want to castle long and all that fun stuff, right? Don't forget. So with d3 here, we put that on the table. They don't have to play d takes e4. They could play knight c6, as is the second most common move. And here we can just play knight to f3. Black here does have some options for like equal endgames. For example, just take d1, king takes d1. Still, we want to play knight b5, so they can't let that just happen to them. But they can play something like bishop to d7 to prepare against defending against something like that. So knight to f6 is also an option here. Bishop to f4 continues to put some dangerous threats on the table. That covers knight to c6 in this position. And instead of e6 here, I'll cover one more move, which is just a6 in this position. Really, like the fifth most common move, just trying to take away knight to b5. All we need to do against a6, as usual, is takes, and just start looking at knight c4, knight b6. Here, we can just play something like knight to f3 first, try and play d4. But yeah, knight is going to come to c4 and start looking at the b6 square. And in this position, black is kind of a little bit worse off here, as they are down in development to us. So that's pretty much the YanYan Gambit at whole. Let me do a brief summary of it after I talk a little bit about the opening at large. This was discovered by YanYan, a prominent user in our Discord community, and played by a lot of people. Chess Player LOL, Spreak, Mora Horror, HighlyCruciferous, who plays so many great games, which helped put this study together. Shout out to HighlyCruciferous and YanYan himself. I'm going to link those studies in the YouTube description here. But yeah, I mean, I just love that now we have completed the Gambit Chad repertoire. Against e4, we had really had options against everything else. Against e5, we had the Goring Gambit. We had knight to f3, d4, takes. We had this, which was the improved version of the Danish Gambit, including knight to f3 and knight to c6 in these lines, because there's no d5, as we can take here. So we had the Goring Gambit against e5. Against e6, we had the Alapin Gambit in this position, playing bishop to e3, and now playing f3, and trying to checkmate along this diagonal, as we have done pretty often. Against the Caro, we had the von Hennig Gambit, which was pretty similar in this idea of playing bishop to c4 and putting lots of pressure on f7 very fast. But against Against the Alekhine, we had the dummy gambit. Oh my goodness. How could I possibly forget? Bishop takes f7 check and e6 and all the tricky stuff that follows here. So just great stuff all the way across the channel. And against the Scandinavian, you can play a von Popiel gambit, which you could play as with 1d4 as well, of course. But this phenomenal line. The Sicilian was the one thing. The Sicilian was the one thing that the Gambit Trad repertoire, which was also full, more than full from the black side, was lacking. And that I was playing knight to c3 on stream. I was playing some Mangarini sometime, but the Mangarini is so easy to decline. They can just keep a pawn on d6 and just recapture on c5, right? The YanYan really fills the last hole here with c3 and with d5 knight to a3. I'll talk here a little bit about options other than d5. It's kind of interesting because I have the Lichess database on, and okay, let's select really everything here. d5 is the 4th most common move, and knight f6 is the 5th most common move, but I am sure that as maybe I take out bullet and increase the average rating here, yeah, d5 is now actually the most common move. So as you kind of work your way up, d5 and knight to f6, I mean, it's kind of crazy that these moves were more common, because against anything else, you'll just play d4, and now with your pawn on c3, you'll control the whole center of the board. So what black needs to do is to play d5 or knight to f6 to fight against this pawn to have something. So the YanYan Gambit is one part of our repertoire against d5. The other part of that is going to be against knight to f6, and I am very, very excited for the next YouTube video that I will share with you guys that is going to cover what to do against knight to f6 in this position. But c3 will be our thing. C3 will be our thing. This will be what I play on stream. This will be what I share in the Discord, which is an awesome, awesome community. And I really hope you guys would love to join it. So here is, and you can find that link in the description, d5. Here is a full recap of what we need to do. We're going to play knight to a3. If they take on e4, what we're going to do is we're going to play d3. If they take again, bishop takes d3. We're going to bring our bishop to f4 and queen to e2. We're going to castle long. If they play knight to f6, bishop to f4, this is now we're threatening knight to b5. You don't want to play knight to b5 if there's just knight to d5, but otherwise it's going to be an option that you want to keep in mind. And otherwise, if a6, you could also have the idea to play knight to c4 and hop in knight to d6 or knight to b6, depending on whether or not you have that killer pin working. Worst comes to worst, they will manage to castle and play e6, bishop to e7, in which case you'll still have some exciting options to attack. If you long castle, you can just push these pawns. If you short castle, you can still bring your rook to the center and hop your knights into e5. And in a lot of ideas, you can play bishop to b1 and queen to c2 and start looking at this diagonal. If they don't take on d3 and they play a move like knight to f6, we're still going to play bishop to f4 and start looking at d takes e4 because we can play rook takes d1 against any queen trade, and then our knight can hop around whether on b5 or on c4 and start hopping into c7 or d6. And against other options here, they have like d4, but we're just going to play knight to f3 and bishop to b5. Against knight to c6, we can play this nice move d4, where we want to play either e takes d5 or pawn to d5 in these lines to just really strike. And in a lot of options, we want to play bishop to f4, knight to b5, and hop into c7. So that about covers the YanYan Gambit. I will link the Lichess studies in the description below, and I'm so excited to play this, to see my games, to see your games, as we figure this one out together. Oh, the last thing I didn't get to was what to do for black. What to do for black. Oh my goodness, this has never even been played before. It's never even been played before. I can't believe I forgot this. d3. Knight to f6, bishop to f4. So I talked about this position, right? And how our best option is going to be d takes e4 with that queen trade. And as a result of that queen trade, our knight is going to have a lot of options. So d takes e4 is pretty dangerous proposition for black. And they don't even want to play pawn takes d3 because bishop takes d3 gives us, well, again, lots of files. How can they keep the d file closed? It's this move never to be played before. Let's turn on the Lichess database and actually bring it back to its full. E3. 0 games. 0 games in this position, e3. Either we play bishop takes e3, which is a serious setback for that bishop, or we play pawn takes e3, but we've kept this file closed. And now with knight c6, there's e5 coming against knight b5. There's knight d5, which is going to target the bishop, and we can't even move out of the way because of takes. So like, let's say knight f3 here to stop e5. They can play your knight d5, attacking the bishop, and putting pressure on that pawn as well. So e3, never to be played before, is going to be by far the best option, I think, against the YanYan Gambit. Don't tell anyone. Don't tell anyone. Keep playing the YanYan until people start playing this, which hopefully won't happen. All right, Gambit on, and peace out, you guys. I'll see you all next time.
William Grave, the Gambit man, takes his seat at the board. E4, E5, Knight F3, Bishop C5. The Bushgas Gambit on the board. On with the Gambit classes. Hero pod unlocked.